Hello everyone, DJ here, and welcome back to Thomas Characters Explained for a very special episode, as today we are not just explaining one Thomas character, we are once again explaining two. That's right, this week we are explaining Norman and Dennis. Now normally I save the actual explanation parts until after the intro segment, but I realized pretty early into the making of this video that if you are a more casual Thomas fan, or you're just not up on your Thomas lore, you might not understand the connection that these two characters have, so I thought it best to start out with that. So if you were unaware, Norman and Dennis are indeed actually twins, as confirmed by several sources including the Character Encyclopedia released a few years back. Norman and Dennis, however, are not twins in the traditional sense when it comes to Thomas and Friends. Usually, when twin engines are introduced, they are almost exclusively seen together, and are known to be twins from the start. Not so for Norman and Dennis, who, despite being twins, have never actually interacted on screen, nor were they initially intended to be twins to begin with. We'll get into specifics in a bit, but for right now, all you need to know is that Dennis was introduced first in Season 9 based on a BR 11001 diesel shunter, and when the show transitioned to CGI in 2009, it was later planned that Dennis would return in the 2011 special Day of the Diesels. The show crew, however, decided against it, instead creating a whole new character based on the BR 11001 Norman. This decision, however, unintentionally made the two engines twins, as the 11001 only ever had one example built, meaning that in-universe, Norman and Dennis were the only members of their class and thus twins by default, which later material, like the aforementioned encyclopedia, would confirm. Many people have asked me to talk about Norman and Dennis, and I figure now is as good a time as any, so sit back and relax as I explain Norman and Dennis. Let's start out with Dennis, as he was the first of the pair introduced. Dennis was first introduced in the Season 9 episode Thomas's Day Off as one of that season's prominent new characters. He is characterized initially as being a very lazy character, and that essentially is his whole gimmick. In Thomas's Day Off, Dennis arrives on the island the same day that Thomas is given the day off. Dennis, however, not wanting to do any work, tries scheme after scheme in order to get Thomas to do his work for him. He initially lies about not being able to shunt his trucks, then tries to make Thomas help him find the school his trucks full of slate tiles are going to, and finally fakes an engine overheat. Thomas decides to find another engine to help Dennis, and this frustrates Dennis as all his attempts to throw his duties on Thomas have by this point, of course, all backfired. Thus, Dennis literally runs away from his work and derails, crashing into a ditch. Upon finding Dennis, Thomas learns the truth, and Dennis learns a lesson about poor work ethic, changing his ways and promising to be really useful in future. Dennis apparently does not mean it when he issues apologies all the time, but I do not know where the wiki got this information from, so take it with a pinch of salt. Dennis, after Thomas's Day Off, would only ever appear once more in the 2008 special The Great Discovery, in a small cameo appearance with the rest of the Diesels. And that was the last we saw of him. There are sparse bits of information about him scattered all around, however. For example, a magazine article stated that Dennis lives at the Vickerstown Diesel Works, and reportedly it was Ian McHugh who pushed for Dennis's return in Day of the Diesels, as his son was a fan. This plan, of course, would fall through in the end, leading to the introduction of Norman. Norman is also a diesel shunter who, as I explained before, was introduced in the 2011 Thomas and Friends film Day of the Diesels, a special which the crew was originally planning to reintroduce Dennis, but opted for a new character based on the same real-life engine. Enter Norman. Norman's introduction set a rather interesting new standard for twin engines in the show, or twin characters in the show, I should say, to be more accurate. Whereas previously, twin characters had to be nearly identical in every way, Norman and Dennis have noticeably different designs. Dennis is a little stockier, and his front end is much less angled compared to Norman's, and both engines have very different liveries. Norman's being a very tasteful red and orange, and Dennis's being a mix of different shades of gray. According to his 2013 official character bio, before coming to Sodor, Norman worked at a busy marshalling yard on the other railway. However, he suffered numerous mechanical faults, which led to the manager believing he was lazy, leading to him being sent to Sodor alongside other CGI diesel mainstays Paxton and Sydney, where he of course met his twin brother Dennis, although this interaction has never been seen or referenced on screen to my knowledge, only ever referenced in his character bio. Once on Sodor, Norman is said to be eager to be given the chance to prove that he is not lazy at all. Norman, as I said earlier, made his debut in the 2011 Thomas & Friends film Day of the Diesels, where his only really significant action was helping Diesel 10 in his plot to take over the Steamworks. Other than that, his role was basically just a cameo one, and that is pretty well how Norman would operate throughout the rest of the series, never having led an episode once, cameoing in episodes like Fiery Flynn, Bust My Buffers, The Missing Christmas Decorations, The Frozen Turntable, Disappearing Diesels, Den and Dart, Diesel's Ghostly Christmas, Diesel and the Ducklings, Engine of the Future, The Big Freeze, Diesel Do Right, Steam Team to the Rescue, Diesel Glows Away, and his final appearance coming in the regular show in Season 24's A New Arrival. He would also have cameos in several films, including The Great Race, Journey Beyond Sodor, and Big World, Big Adventures. In all of these, it varies if he actually ends up speaking or not, and if I'm being honest, the most memorable appearance of Norman to me is in the episode The Frozen Turntable, as in that episode he actually gets some decent dialogue with engines who aren't just the regular diesels for once. Further interestingly, Norman was actually meant to have his own spotlight episode in Season 21's Norman Says Nothing, which would have been about Norman witnessing an accident at the Diesel Works and hiding away so as to not get involved. This episode, of course, was unfortunately cancelled. Norman is said by the character encyclopedia to be a very kind engine, offering a place to sleep for Gordon and Thomas when the turntable at Tidmouth was jammed. He is also described as an engine who constantly breaks down, and very much dreams of an overhaul someday. Finally, Norman is also said to be an engine who doesn't talk much, letting others do the talking for him, taking orders well, but also being very easily swayed by other engines and not being the brightest engine in the shed. Very similar to Paxton and Sydney, potentially explaining why all three of them helped Diesel 10 in his various schemes against the steam engines throughout the CGI era. Otherwise though, the Fat Controller apparently holds Norman in high regard. With all that said, I think now is a perfect time to jump into some real-life history and talk about the pair's basis. Norman and Dennis are based on the BR11001, built by BR Ashford Railway Works beginning on the 1st of February 1949 and completed in 1950. Designed by Oliver Bullied while he was still the chief mechanical engineer of the Southern Railway prior to nationalization, 11001 was a diesel mechanical shunter that worked on branch lines and shunting details near Norwood Junction, as well as goods services on the Caterham line in the 1950s. The engine was an 060, weighing in at 49.45 long tons, having a Paxman RPH Series 1 engine, a Vulcan Sinclair fluid coupling, an SSS PowerFlow 3-speed gearbox, a power output of 500 horsepower, a tractive effort of 33,500 pound-force, and a top speed of 72 kilometers an hour. The locomotive was also rather unique in terms of power transmission among diesels, firstly because of its mechanical transmission, but also its wheels being moved by rods driven by a jackshaft on the final drive. In layman's terms, the motor, through pure mechanical transmission assisted by slight hydraulic transmission through the fluid couplings, moves a small wheel-looking piece at the rear of the engine, with rods connecting it to the wheels, making the wheels turn. 11001 is credited as the first diesel locomotive produced and put into service by British Railways, and it was relatively limited in what it could do as it was only given air brakes with no means of providing braking to an entire train, thus it was not the most efficient of locomotives. This was of course in slight contrast to the initial purpose of the 11001, which was to be an improvement of the Mattel 350 horsepower diesel-electric shunters built in 1937 with Bullied-designed ones built in 1949. Another issue it faced was its speed settings in context to its gearbox. Its low-speed gear was much too inflexible for shunting, and the high-speed range, which only had 3 gear steps, was too slow for line duties, meaning it was not a very efficient locomotive at any of its duties. A rather sad ending came for 11001 in 1959, however, as in the previous year, 1958, it suffered a gearbox failure, after which it was stored at Ashford and then subsequently withdrawn and scrapped in 1959. I think here, however, we can start to form our own TV series headcanons and simply say that within the Thomas & Friends universe, 2 of the engines were built, and I'm going to say they were 11001 Dennis, as he carries this number and is very clearly meant to be the real 11001, and 11002 Norman, both of whom would go on to work on Sodor rather than being scrapped, so a happy end for everyone as per usual. When it comes to Dennis and Norman, my usual critiques of, oh, they should have used them more, very much still stand. And that is in large part thanks to Norman, who behind the scenes had a very well thought out character and backstory. But beyond all of those usual critiques, I think the much more interesting thing is how Dennis and Norman are essentially 2 different takes on the same character within the same world. Dennis is characterized as a lazy engine who may or may not have learned his lesson by the end of his debut story. For Thomas and Friends, this is a pretty stock standard character idea, but then you have Norman, who is essentially a neat inversion of this trope. Norman is an engine who initially is thought to be lazy, but he actually just suffers from persistent mechanical failures. And although he tends to be a bit of a follower as well as a bit gullible, he very much tries his best to put the laziness claims to rest. All of this characterization for the 2 of them, of course, was never really shown on screen, minus Dennis's debut story, and only exists in places like the wiki, official character bios, and the character encyclopedia. But at the end of the day, it's better than nothing, and after going through the research for this script, I have to say that I have come out of it very much a fan of Dennis and Norman. Alright folks, welcome to Collection Corner, and for this episode's rendition of Collection Corner, I thought I would try something a little different, and essentially just go unscripted, because for the past couple Collection Corners where I've scripted it, I've really kind of just been saying the same things, so I thought, screw it, let's do something different today, and maybe see if this works a little better. So here we have the 2000, and I'm looking at the copyright date right now, 2006 Take Along Dennis, and the 2011, although I think it might have actually been released in 2012, I'm not too certain, Take and Play Norman. Now, I want to first off start by saying that these 2 models are incredibly well detailed, down to things like Dennis having his proper BR number on him, and then all the little individual panels and door handles, and little toolboxes, and the little box thing on top of their sort of engine compartment. It's all right there, it's all beautifully modeled, and Norman even has some extra detailing on his cab, which is really, really cool. But I think what makes these guys really special is that their models very much reflect how they are related in the show, but how they still are very individual characters. So, for example, earlier I mentioned how, in terms of design, Dennis is a very kind of stocky engine, his face is a little less angled than Norman's, and that is very much reflected on their die-cast models. And, of course, part of the reason that is there is because these are very accurately made models. These come from 2 very, very good eras of the die-cast Thomas & Friends toy lines. Of course, I could maybe see a line like Earl doing these guys a little better, but you know what? These Take Along and Take and Play models are very good. I do want to highlight the faces. The faces are extremely good, and the paint jobs too. Norman's in particular, I don't know why, I am such a fan of Norman's paint job. There's just something about it. But that is pretty well all I have to say about Norman and Dennis in terms of their merchandise. I'm going to give them both a 9 out of 10 because they're both extremely accurate and they both look really good. So, giving them both a 9 out of 10. Alrighty folks, that concludes today's video on Norman and Dennis. I hope you all enjoyed. And if anything, this really proves that I need to listen to you guys more, because this suggestion was a great one. Therefore, I highly implore you to share your ideas for video topics and other characters for this series in the comments below. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!